Marco, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mariam.
I'm looking forward to our conversation and seeing what will emerge, where it will lead us. Um, Most probably around the topic of complexity, not knowing,
Sounds
especially
really
in these
excited.
times, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're just sharing a little bit before hitting the record button, the craziness that's going on in the world. We're in April 2025. The world goes crazy, so it's even more important for us facilitators to stay grounded. So thank you for joining me. And well, we always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I was reflecting on this question, Miriam, and it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting. I don't exactly know when. I don't think there has been a moment when I decided, well, now I'm a facilitator. It kind of evolved over time, kind of gradually. Maybe somewhere around 2012, 2014, because I was working for this master's program in leadership for sustainability. You've met some of my colleagues, some people who've taken the master's program, and also some people have been guest teachers at the master's program. Mary Alice Arthur and Tennyson Wolf, they taught art of hosting to hundreds of our former students. So this master's was very far ahead in terms of thinking, because back in 2005, they thought, we need sustainability skills, but also we need to understand something about leadership, how to motivate people. And the teaching method was very much flip the classroom, have students being in dialogue. And I was working that as a program staff. And we had to learn about facilitation, like how do you host a world cafe as a class for
Mm,
students to understand about their leadership, or how do you host an open space, or how do you host a dialogue on a leadership topic where nobody has the answer. And then over time, we had to become a bit better at it because that's the job that we were doing. It was, of course, a lot of content teaching. We had to teach some stuff, but it was a lot of participatory dialogue based kind of learning. And so I think, yeah, 2, 3 years in, then we had regular art of hosting trainings as part of the curriculum, which, and I'm very happy to say that it was student led. The students brought it in and said, like, we need to learn more about facilitation. We learned it together with them, and then we also, as the program staff, got better at it over time. And then by the time I left the university after 5 years, and I wanted to continue as a freelance consultant. So facilitation was the main thing that I was offering clients as they
mm.
asked for ways of working together in dialogic methods to achieve results. But I would say about 10, 12, 13 years ago, I started calling myself more and more of a facilitator in a sense.
Beautiful. And oh, thank you for sharing the backstory. It really opens my heart to hear that you're teaching leadership through facilitation methods. And there's this hope emerging in me, or this curiosity about the future leaders, or I guess nowadays leaders who have developed the skills of facilitation by experiencing them during their
Mhm.
studies. And also, as you explained, how to have a world cafe about leadership challenges for which we don't have the answer. So
Yeah,
basically, to what I hear is leadership means sitting without not knowing.
absolutely.
Leadership
And
means including other voices.
yeah, and it's something about when you explore something deep into yourself about who you are becoming. These are things that I think 10% of that or 20% of that can come from the TED talk that you watch or the inspiring speaker that comes from a keynote. Not to dismiss, I think it's important to get inspiration. But if you really want to do the inner work, that comes through self inquiry
Mm.
or conversations with others. But both of them require dialogue. You sit with other peers, you're in a small circle kind of group, you do a coaching course, but they come through dialogic conversations that you have in intimate settings with people that you trust. You develop trust over time. And it's our job as facilitators to create some of the preconditions for that. We don't do the job for them. You know, people develop at their own pace if they want, when they want. Sometimes they don't want and they push back, but you create preconditions for people to evolve over time.
Yeah. And I was listening to a podcast the other day and they spoke about wisdom, that wisdom is something that you cannot outsource. So
Mm-hmm.
wisdom comes through lived experience. You can read as many books as you want and watch all these TED Talks, but they won't get you to the point of wisdom. And from what you just said, I was thinking that with leadership, it's maybe the same. You
Mm,
can read so many leadership books,
yeah.
um, or but it's something that comes through the lived experience, the inner work, the growth.
You cannot outsource. So what I'm hearing from you is you cannot outsource what you learn about leadership. You have to be
Exactly.
there and do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds wise and not outsourced also as your own thought because it has to become yours before
Yeah.
you embody it.
Yeah. And I would be curious about what have you, what is it about the art of hosting that you use this as the facilitation method that you
Mm.
based the leadership course on? And then how has all of this influenced you as a facilitator, consultant nowadays?
So I don't know how much your listeners know about the art of hosting, and I'm really hoping to give it justice in a nutshell. I'm aware of time. So art of hosting is a DNA, is a collection of practices, but also it's an underlying philosophy behind a lot of ideas around facilitation. So the tools of facilitation are simple. You can read them up, you know, what you said about wisdom. You cannot outsource wisdom. So the tools of facilitation, you can read them online. The art of hosting is a philosophy where there is an underlying DNA around how do we host ourselves? How do we, you know, tap into our own resources and be aware of who we are as facilitators? How do we participate in conversations and we be good participants? How do we host others? And how can we be good stewards and co-facilitators in a community of practice? How do we stay in communities of practice? And to me, the gem of the art of hosting has been the notion of this fourfold practice: host yourself, be a good participant, host others, and be in a community of practice. And also a lot of wisdom in the community of practice itself, like just the ways in which people, art hosting people, are with one another, and the generosity in which they build
Mm.
practices together and share wisdom. And I think the third thing that has been really a great insight that I got from the art of hosting is the notion of process design, because there are so many different tools that we know about facilitation, and you know 30, well, 100 facilitation tools. I know 100 facilitation tools. The risk for the relatively, and I say this with a lot of love and compassion, but people who are relatively new to facilitation might be at risk of saying, well, I know how to do open space now, so I'm an open space consultant. That's great. Open space is one of my favorite methods. But when you reach a client, you really want to look at the specific needs, and then you look at the tools, and then you see what's fit for purpose, but from an overarching kind of design perspective. And so the process design has been one of the great gifts of the art of hosting. And sorry, to come back to your question about what we learned over the years about the art of hosting has been the notion of process design, the community of practice, and the fourfold practice,
Mm.
which we found super helpful in ways in which we can design journeys of leadership development. But that was like 12 years ago when I was still working there. Then I
Yeah.
have evolved over time.
And this was then my question. So, how has it shaped your work that you're doing today?
Um, it's still informing a lot of the ways in which I look at creating processes, designing processes. Uh, Now, over the last 10 years, a lot of that has evolved, and art of hosting and in general process design has been merged with adult development and leadership development theories, like how people grow and what kind of how do they grow bigger minds to reach the complexity of the world, to meet the complexity of the world? And then complexity theories, which was one of our early inquiries over email some weeks
Yeah.
ago about, like how can we design spaces where people can meet the complexity of the world?
Mm. So how can we?
I don't
Because
know. Do you have 5 hours?
because I think I think nowadays it really becomes obvious to everyone that understanding complexity and maybe not thriving in complexity, but maybe resting in complexity is the
Mhm.
new skill. I don't know. I would be curious about um, your perspective. What is the relationship between complexity and leadership? And how can you actually teach that? Or is it a mindset thing?
There is something you can teach, but I'm really inspired about what you said about you cannot outsource wisdom. There is something you can teach, but there is something you have to experience yourself as what do you want to how can we create conditions for somebody to experience resting in complexity? I even dare say thriving in complexity. I might be in the minority, but I think it's people can thrive in complexity. Um, so I'm a member of Cultivating Leadership, which is a collective of 80 plus consultants, and we work with adult development, leadership development to equip leaders to thrive in complexity. And so we work at the intersection between leadership skills, adult development, leadership skills, so that you can grow over time more capacities and complexity theories. So how do you meet the complexity of the world, and what is the inner complexity that you want to evolve over time, like required so that you can face this world of uncertainty, this world where we don't know what the heck is going on, and it drives our fear mechanisms, it drives our fight or flight response, it drives a lot of anxiety.
Mm,
And so I think our sweet spot is that intersection between how do we grow bigger minds in the face of complexity so that we can meet the complexity out there with enough complexity in here, and just acknowledging our own body responses, our own mind automatic responses, and then growing skills and also very practical habits of dialogue, habits of mind, practices over time.
mm. And it sounds to me almost like a twofold. One, when I hear you correctly, is about nervous system regulation.
Mm,
So
yeah,
complexity means uncertainty. Uncertainty means stress. Stress means reptile brain,
yeah.
amygdala firing, fight, flight, freeze, craziness. So how can we calm down that one through nervous
Mm,
system regulation? And the other one is more of a maybe intellectual
mm,
exercise of how to make sense of complexity. And
yeah.
then I guess then there's a third one with, okay, so what do we do that then with it? If we're a leader, this means they are followers. So how can we be a
Mm,
leader in all of that?
mm. That sums it up well, I think. Yeah, I think it's a good way to capture it. So there is the body responses, like nervous system kind of responses. There is the cognitive side of complexity, which is the stuff that attracted me first, because I'm admittedly a nerd, but I'm in good company with people who remind me, well, there's a lot of wisdom in the body and in our responses. And then the third one that I hear you speak about is also like, okay, what do we do differently? What are the practices that you can put in place? I think it's a good way to summarize some of the work that we can do to facilitate self-development and team development in complexity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it that we that scares leaders about the topic of complexity? So yeah.
Mm. That's a good question. I was curious when I read some of your LinkedIn posts about unprofessionalism and
Mm,
professionalism, because maybe it's connected. So we know this, right? Like everybody who works with clients, who works with organizations now that are overwhelmed by the complexity of the world, we have like an immune system response, like, oh, let's respond with KPIs, let's respond with the master plan, the 5-year plan, and here are the milestones. Like, we know that they don't work. We know that they don't work. We have to say, but I say this with compassion. We have to pretend that we have predictability of the world because our performance depends on this. And so I will get promoted if I pretend that I have control. Or we have shareholders who are asking us, what are the results going to be in a quarter from now? I don't know. I'm just going to make up a number. So as long as you can believe me. So, but there is something maybe about professionalism, what you talked about. I hope I'm depicting professionalism in the way you've been talking about it. But there are a lot of drivers for us to pretend that we have control and we have prediction capabilities for the world out there. Inwardly, we know that that doesn't work. We know that the world is more unpredictable than we pretend it to be. And then the stress response would be, well, how do I face this unpredictability without faking that I would know? And acknowledging all the incentives for me to pretend that I have the answer, to pretend that I can predict the world, to give certainty to the people who report to me because they look up to me as a leader, so I should have the answer. That's another one that actually comes up quite regularly when we teach very senior leaders. Like, people are looking up to me as the guy who should have the answer, or the guy or the woman who should have the answer, and they don't. And so we try to regulate their system and admit some areas of not knowing.
And
that's the first thing that we could do, right?
yeah.
At least when they sit with other leaders who are doing the same program, the other leaders are senior enough to say, hey guys, this is a problem that I'm struggling with. Oh, me too, me too, me too. And then the leaders can open up and say, well, actually, we don't have the answer to these leadership questions, which is a very human and normal thing to do.
Yes, and so scary. And two questions bubble up for me, or two curiosities. One is, as it sounds, it is a systems problem or a systems challenge because only one leader, so I was thinking about the prisoner's dilemma the other day. If only one leader admits that they don't know, and no one else does, they are just a fool, and they will lose face. So in order to really have this positive development around complexity means that everyone has to admit that they don't know, and then there can be dialogue and innovation. Otherwise, if everyone just pretends as if they knew or doesn't allow, then there is no dialogue, there's no innovation. So how do you deal then with the system approach or the organizational development, actually? And what are alternatives to KPI? So
I
how
want to
do
go
the
to the first one first. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So the first one, because one of the podcasts that I listened was your own podcast when you interviewed yourself about psychological safety. And I think about the prisoner's dilemma when it comes to psychological safety. Like, it would be great if in this group of people, in this group of leaders, we would all open up and be vulnerable, but I don't want to be the first. So like, that is the first movers kind of problem. We're like, why should I be the first to expose myself? We are lucky to have, when we do a big leadership development program for a large client, these people are very senior. We're lucky to have a very senior sponsor who comes there, and they are the first to be vulnerable and say, guys, I don't have the answer to this. I've been through this myself. I have been through these leadership challenges myself. And I guess what we know from psychological safety research is when somebody in a position of power makes an admission like that, you don't have to agree with everything that they say, but it makes a huge difference because we perceive power differentials and like, okay, that puts my system at ease. My boss doesn't know, gives us all permission not to know.
Yeah. And I hear you say you're lucky to have that or fortunate. And I wonder to what extent you can make this a condition. Would you think that it's maybe not, is it possible? Or this goes into another rabbit hole.
Sure.
wondering if it's even possible to train only one leader about these things and vulnerability without the others also joining in.
I guess we do that when we do executive coaching of some selected leaders. When we do programs, we always invite somebody for sponsorship.
Mm.
Well, for one thing to say, please tell everybody, like the 100 people who are below you on the organizational chart, how important it is, self-knowledge and these leadership skills. And we invite them always to be sponsors. Then to your question, is it possible to coach one leader? I don't know. Sometimes the best we can do is to have a conversation with the leaders, asking them to be sponsors if they generally believe that it's a great thing to do. And when we can't, we still send an email to the most senior leader to say, well, if you did show up there to the first session, it would be a great signal to the organization.
Yeah.
And if you're not there, what is the you signal to the organization? You guys all take this course. I don't have time for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking because I think there is an impact on the direct team. So if but then in the leadership team, I can see how it can become dangerous for a leader. And then it really depends on the toxicity of an organization and their culture, how it's how others would respond to it. Because I think as a human being, I think we all kind of desire being seen, being heard for who we are, and having this level of trust and a sense of belonging that is almost disarming.
And what I hear you say, Miriam, is that you're afraid that that would not be possible if there is toxicity in the culture. Like, what would it take for people to let the guard down?
Yeah, I was wondering if there's only one person who does it, who lets the guard down.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you can solve the problem mathematically, seeing where the equilibrium is, that how high in the hierarchy a leader has to be so that they impact the entire culture. But I would be curious how to solve or how to approach this topic from anecdotal evidence or experience, whether you have seen whether it's possible.
I think we all know this as facilitators. We can invite people to abide by some principles, In this group, for example, if you do like a leadership practice group, that would be a small group of 5 or 6. So the numbers make a big difference. You're in a small group with people. There is a big program that we do, but everybody is in a small pod of people with which you talk about your leadership challenge. And you have, through the facilitation, you have principles that you invite your participants to abide by. And that's always the tricky balance there, right? It's an invitation. Like, you cannot force people to talk using these rules, but you can model them as a facilitator. That's probably one of the best things that you could do. And we've also noticed the importance of you as a facilitator modeling these principles. So there is a principle of confidentiality, there's a principle of leaning in, there's a principle of curiosity, there's a principle of, I don't know, speak from your experience, watch your statements versus curious questions, and we just make invitations. And it takes a while, right? Sometimes by the second session, people are just learning their ways, and usually these principles can create preconditions for good conversations.
Yeah.
And then it's an emergent property. Like, trust is an emergent property of the social system. You cannot engineer it, but you can create some preconditions. Here's a bit of water, here's a bit of soil, here is a bit of shade, and let's see if
and every one of us is a gardener.
Exactly, because yes, you have to invite people to actively participate. I don't like when people sit in a participatory setting and say, well, I want this thing to be like this for me, because everybody is a co-owner of the culture and the collective.
Yeah. And I noticed
properties.
that there is something that changes as soon as participants walk the talk or step down from the balcony. Because,
Mm,
and I note I'm very sensitive to actually anyone. And it's interesting, once you start paying attention, you cannot unhear it. When people speak about you or them, when they actually mean I,
hmm. Yeah.
they start speaking about people have to do that, or when you don't dare to speak about personal issues, then you would put up your guard. If all they want to say is, when I don't dare to speak about personal issues,
Mm,
I put up my guard.
right. You can invite people to speak
Mm,
from the I perspective.
yeah.
Whether or not they will do it depends on them. But you can invite and you can model that too, I guess,
Yeah. And I think
and
it's
invite
not
people to be
only
in a
in
space of
leadership
inquiry.
workshops.
Mm,
I noticed
yeah.
this even in personal settings. There is a tendency,
Mm,
and because it feels safe. And I think there is a shift once we get them to the I perspective.
absolutely. And I don't know what you meant about the balcony, but I don't know. We have practices of inviting people to step on the balcony, but I don't know what you meant by people stepping down from the balcony.
For me, the balcony is like you're watching what's happening in the arena, but you're not
Hmm.
part of it. So it's easy to judge and to give advice and to speak about everything that's happening
Oh,
down there if you're sitting
oh,
up.
got it.
Yeah.
Got it, got it.
What do you
Because
mean by that?
actually, if you want to go down on another rabbit hole, we actually love the balcony, but we have a different take on the balcony.
Tell me more.
It's is it high fits? Is it high fits or is it built orbit? I forgot the reference and I should know the reference because I teach the stuff. But so balcony would be the difference between the balcony and the dance floor. It's actually a developmental move when we invite people to be active participants on the conversation and at the same time make a noticing as if from a balcony, but for us it's a really good thing to do. The difference between that person who says, oh, I think we should do this or we should do that, is that we invite people to be on the balcony of themselves as well, which is a big developmental move. Like, oh,
Mm,
Miriam, I noticed like 5 minutes before we hit the record button that I was nervous because my phone was not working and my microphone was not working. I didn't have headphones. And I noticed myself getting a bit stressed and a bit anxious. And then the moment I settled down, I noticed that I was calmer. So I am watching myself from the balcony as well.
yes.
And I can invite you to watch from your own balcony, or we can watch us from the balcony, which is a
Mm,
developmental move that we invite humans and people to do about themselves and about the team dynamics.
yeah.
And it's a huge shift that the people can take because they increase the reflexivity of their own conversations, which is a huge thing in complex systems because we can get trapped into like thinking who's right and who's wrong, or I can get very attached to my own perspective. And the moment I can say, Miriam, we talked about this thing, and I watched myself becoming really defensive about my position or about my opinion, then we can relax some of those things that we hold on so tightly to. It doesn't mean that I don't have an opinion anymore, but if I can watch my opinion from the balcony, that allows for a much more generative dialogue between us.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for bringing up this distinction. I love it. Because I think the what I hear is that the main difference is awareness. So are you stepping on the balcony unconsciously in order to detach yourself
Mm,
from the rest?
mm,
Or are you stepping on the balcony as a move of self-awareness to see better what's happening, including
precisely.
yourself?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's I read this book about the voice in the head and how to self-regulate and how to overcome anxiety. And one of the strategies is the speaking to ourselves in the third person.
Mm,
So, oh, I observe, Miriam, that you're getting anxious, that you're seeing only the dark things,
mm,
the dark sides.
mm.
And that way we calm ourselves down because we have more perspective. Yeah.
That sounds sensible. That sounds like really good advice. And it sounds very much in keeping with this notion that we teach about balcony and dance floor, because we invite our participants to hold the balcony perspective on themselves and others and group dynamics. And then the moment you can do that on yourself, that becomes like a huge developmental move in your own leadership journey. because you can watch yourself like, I don't know, like there's a leader who says, I get feedback that I get a bit angry when I'm in meetings. And then the moment they can watch themselves,
Mm.
Robert Keegan says, you cannot change what you cannot see. The moment you can see it, you have more options like, oh, okay, I'm getting angry again. Like, let's stop for a moment. What's the pattern here that is getting activated? And how do I create options so that I can do something differently about it if I don't like it?
Yeah. And what I notice is the challenge
Mm,
of noticing without going into judgment. So it's so easy to notice and then, "Oh, such a bad person. I'm such a bad leader because I got angry and I did this wrong and that wrong."
mm,
And then you have the internal dialogue. And
yeah.
instead noticing, oh, okay, this has happened.
Mm,
No judgment. That's okay. We're all human.
yeah.
And once you can stay calm, then you can find,
Mm,
as you said, options.
yeah. I don't know about you, Miriam, but when we do this, my experience with these would be like a small groups within a leadership development journey where people notice themselves. And as you said, like the tendency would be to judge themselves. Oh, I've done this again. My experience, anecdotal, but it's from quite a few years of practice, is that your friends are compassionate towards you a lot more than you're compassionate towards
Mm.
yourself. And I wonder how often you have to hear that from others, like, oh, actually, they would cut me some slack. Why don't I do that to myself?
Mm.
Because I don't know, there is something about maybe it's an outside perspective in like I would be more gentle or more lenient towards Miriam's shortcomings than herself. I don't know. I
Yes.
hope you would be towards my shortcomings too. But over time, if we hear that 100 times, maybe we can project some of that self-compassion towards ourselves as well, maybe.
Yeah, 100%. And I recently, one of the things that I emphasize the most when training feedback, for instance, is positive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And because it doesn't, we struggle so much to accept positive feedback and we struggle a lot to give positive feedback,
Mm-hmm.
especially amongst leaders, because the little voice always says, "Who are you to? Who am I to?" Um, And that's what I hear in what you say that over time, how can we grow this capacity and maybe confidence in
Mm-hmm.
ourselves that we stop beating ourselves up? And how can
Yeah.
we help our peers to do that? By reassuring them and sharing positive feedback and appreciation for the
Yeah.
work they're doing.
You're actually doing really well given the circumstances. Cut yourself some slack. But if we do that over time, then hopefully that increases their capacity to take in the
Yeah,
positive feedback as well.
yeah.
Well, this is one of the things, Miriam, that we've been noticing. We have a culture, so we are a deliberately developmental organization at Cultivate Leadership, which means we practice what we preach. We invite our clients to grow, and we set up the structures in our organization so that we can grow on the job every week. It's not always pretty because when you sign up to grow on the job, that means some weeks I actually don't want to grow. Like I would rather just not hear feedback about my developmental opportunities. But over time, it's a blessing, and we notice that because we have this culture of openly being curious about feedback, giving feedback to others, and being curious about learning from feedback. I don't know. There is something weird that happens, something funny happens in our brain. The moment we speak about feedback, something in us gets activated. I don't know if it's like 20 years of our previous experiences or how we got feedback that really scarred us in the past, but we just get activated.
Hmm.
Like if you send me an email like, Marco, I have some feedback to share with you without saying anything if it's bad or good, I get scared. There is
Yes.
something happening in our brain, like maybe it's some reptilian brain activation. Like, first we assume that it's negative,
Hmm.
and then we get scared even by the word feedback. A colleague and I, we said, like, can we just call it Jonathan so that we don't get so scared by the notion of feedback? So let's say, like, let's share feedback, or let's call it something else. Otherwise, we get too scared by it.
Yeah. Um, I noticed the same, and I wonder. I think there are different levels to it. I think one is indeed that we rarely receive positive,
Mm,
we affirming feedback. And I think it's any feedback is a threat to our ego.
mm,
And I think it's the positive as much as the negative. No, the negative as much as the positive feedback that is a potential threat. Because I think the negative feedback is very clear. You are not,
mm,
and what we hear very often is we make it our identity. So
mm,
we are not good enough. Um, and even if it's just our behavior, then, oh, we are not living up to our standards. So it's
mm,
kind of, yeah, we're not good enough. We're not. Um, and this fuels our imposter syndrome. And I think everyone has
mm.
imposter syndrome. And then the positive feedback, I think, also hits our ego because we have these stories of, I am not good enough.
So how
So,
dare you challenge my belief that I'm
yeah.
not good enough?
And as weird as it sounds, I think it is kind of a threat because we're living in this bubble where we see all of our shortcomings. And then there is someone coming, daring to give us this positive feedback or compliment. And you're like, oh, this is different from my self image.
I have never thought of it that way. It's a great hypothesis. I really like it. It's challenging. Like, oh yeah, but it makes a lot of sense. Like even the positive feedback, I'm not ready for it because my identity was set in the stories that I told myself, and now you come and you threaten that identity by saying that I was actually good at this project and I thought I sucked.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
scary.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any deep um, change, well, anything that threatens in major ways our identity is seen as a threat, like as super scary. Is one of the things that my colleague slash friend slash mentor slash co-founder of the company talks about. It's the mind trap of identity. So we get trapped into believing simple things in complexity to preserve our sanity. And one of the mind traps, so these simplistic ways of thinking in complexity that serve us well as shortcuts, except that sometimes they don't serve us really well. One is the mind trap of ego, the notion that we have an idea about ourselves, which is kind of set in stone, and we believe that we're not going to change over time. Now it's interesting. They've done studies about. I don't know if you heard about this thing. It's called the end of history illusion.
Hmm.
So if you
Yummy.
ask people, um, I don't know the exact reference, but
Yeah.
the end of history illusion is basically this. You ask people like, how much have you changed over the last 10 years? And
Mm.
people journal a little bit and they say, well, I've changed a lot, of course, this and that, the divorce, and I did this, and I've changed quite a bit as a person. And then you ask the same humans, like, how much are you going to change in 10 years? And if they like where they are today, they say, I'm not going to change much, which is kind of a logical fallacy. It's like, of course, you're going to change in 10 years. But people cannot even imagine. So the hypothesis is that it's hard for people even to imagine the possibility that they're going to change in 10 years from now. Whereas in reality, if you look at past evidence, like, well, it's very likely they're going to change in 10 years. Um, and so around that research on the end of history, then Jennifer has hypothesized this notion of like we're trapped by ego. So we have this set kind of idea of who we are, and it's assumed to be unchanging, which is
Mm.
traps us into like it traps us because it prevents us to become who do we want slash need to become next.
Yeah. And I think there is, so research has also shown that we account more to future losses than to future wins. So the potential loss
Mm,
harms us more. And
mm,
then assuming that we'll change also
mm,
means that, oh, will our will our relationships, will our
Mm,
standards, our jobs, will they still be fitting? So what is the
right.
potential loss by us changing? And that's
Mm,
also terrifying.
yeah. And following your reasoning, well, if people can get sad for what they lose, they don't even get excited about what else can you gain from it. Or,
Yes.
what are the possibilities about who you can become next?
Yeah.
Um, which is, yeah,
Which is
should be
actually
counted
very
as well.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when we think of future change, we often tend to see the negative, everything that we're losing.
Yeah.
And thinking back of, I think 99% of the changes that happened in my life, even when they were very, air quotes, bad in the short term, they were
Mm,
all beneficial. So they all made me a better person and they all made my business a more successful venture. So it's actually funny that we still attach the negative to change, although all the evidence in the past
yeah.
points towards the potential positive.
So I have a bit of a nuanced take on that. I completely agree with you. There is maybe there is something a bit evolutionary in it's okay to be a little scared about the unknown because otherwise we wouldn't make it as a species, right? If you had no fear of falling off, you would have hit your head really
Yes.
hard by now, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So there is something evolutionary about having a little bit of fear. Though my question is how much of that is evolutionarily helpful and how
Mhm.
much of that is just a ballast that kind of drags us down? Because I completely agree with you. Like there is so much opportunities that we can be looking forward to and lean into in complexity. Which is one of the things that really excites me about complexity is this notion of the complexity thinking can help you to see risks where maybe you have not seen them before because on an assumption of a linear world of predictable causes and effects, you don't look at some risks. So it's
Mhm.
really good to think about risks. But at the same time, there is like a world of possibilities and opportunities and like new ecosystems that are opening up that you're not even aware of. And so there is so much potential in complexity to think creatively about just it's a whole new world
Mm.
and I would love for people to lean more into that like following your loss aversion kind of bias that we have like can we focus on all the amazing opportunities and complexity
Mm.
that would not be possible on the assumption of a predictable world. This is a maybe people have about complexity, which is kind of connected to what you were saying about the loss aversion is that it is easy and maybe makes a lot of sense in evolutionary terms that people get a bit afraid and resent complexity and unpredictability. Makes a lot of sense. However, um, the kind of radical innovations that we need in the world, climate adaptation and redesigning democracy and all of that, they will not be possible in a linear world.
Mm.
Because if the world of tomorrow is basically like the world of today, but 5% different, on the assumption of a predictable world where tomorrow is a little bit like today, none of the major innovations that we need, even to keep our ship alive, to keep our world alive, they will not be possible. And so
Yes,
we have to pay the price. We have to pay the price of uncertainty that it can go bad, but it can go
yeah,
extremely well. Because on the assumption of a linear world of predictable causes and effects, no major change would be even possible in the first place.
because the change would already have happened because we could
Mm,
just anticipate it and there would be no incentive to deviate from that. So nobody would
exactly.
invest into that if everything is
Yeah.
predictable. And then it's like, oh, I'm such an economist. I'm thinking of the inflation. Expected inflation will become the real inflation. Because if everyone
Okay.
expects things, so that's a Phillips curve in economics, where they say if everyone expects things to become more expensive, what will
Mm,
you do if you're a restaurant owner or a facilitator, a freelancer, you know that next year everything will be 5% more expensive. You increase
mm.
your prices by 5%.
Right.
So everyone increases their prices by 5%. Then by definition, inflation will be 5%.
Predict and supply, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then you
Exactly.
make it happen just by the virtue of
Exactly.
predicting
So
what will happen.
if the future is just a linear outlook on what will the change of 5%,
Yeah.
okay,
No, precisely.
tangent.
And another thing to stimulate your economist's mind is that in complexity and unpredictability and uncertainty, people can get resenting this notion of we don't know what's going to happen next. But in reality, um, innovators and entrepreneurs, like, you need complexity and uncertainty if you want to design the next big thing, whatever the next big thing is,
Yeah.
because it's all about disruption, right?
Yeah.
And so you cannot disrupt if the world is predictable. There's
Yeah.
nothing to disrupt.
Yes. So what is your silver bullet 3 steps approach to handle complexity? I'm exaggerating, obviously.
It's so funny, like, silver bullet and complexity in the same sentence is really like a nice piece of comedy. um so there is no silver bullet, but it's a really good joke. There is, though, a lot that we can do to help leaders to acknowledge complexity first, see complexity for what it actually is, and not for what they want it to be. There is something that we can do in terms of practices to see complexity and frame it and understand it for what it is, like the nature, like the ontological nature of complexity. And then there are some habits of leadership in terms of embracing uncertainty. How do you go about, which is something that you said some minutes ago, how do you go about planning and goals and measurables and all of that? So acknowledging and embracing complexity in terms of the unpredictability of the world. Nobody has the answers. Acknowledging what is truly unpredictable and calling it as it is, which does not mean giving up agency. Like, this is a bias that some people have when they work with complexity, and some people get overwhelmed by complexity and they say, well, if it's complex, I throw my hands up and I cannot do anything. It's totally not true. There is a lot that we can do within our areas of control in complexity.
Mm.
There are ways to map complexity and see complexity. Probably you're aware of the Kinevan framework and other systems kind of mapping tools for mapping the real complexity of the problem, for what it is, like the ontological complexity. What is truly unpredictable in this, and what is predictable, and what can be automated in this. So what is a predictable world and what is an unpredictable world in this specific problem that we have at hand? What is that we can control? What is that we cannot control? What are the variables that we can influence? What are the variables that are completely outside of our scope? Even when you have variables that are outside of your scope, you can do a lot of, like, resilience thinking. What is our exposure to threats? Where are we strong in terms of future unknown scenarios where even threats can become an opportunity to us? There is a lot of things that you can do in terms of scenario planning and future backwards, and forecasting, backcasting with their strengths and limitations. So there is a lot that you can do in terms of scenarios. And then when it comes to ways of being in complexity, which comes back to the coaching and leadership development, we have a lot of tools and approaches, and I would be happy to go into any of these if they have energy for you to explore. But there are a lot of ways in which we can watch our own responses in complexity and how we get trapped into traps of the mind in complexity, be on the balcony of our own kind of thinking in complexity, and how we can increase our reflexivity and our agility to respond in different ways by watching how we normally respond. And then there is a lot that we can do in terms of experimenting and learning, safe to fail experiments, ways in which we can test and iterate fast in complexity to learn something, but we have to learn something by doing it. Experimenting is a bit like the wisdom that you mentioned some minutes ago. You cannot buy wisdom by by reading it in a book, but there is something about experimenting where only by doing something in a complex system, you can get some more information about what is the system able to do or not able to do, inclined to do or really resistant to do.
Mm,
You have to act. You have to probe and experiment a little bit and see what is the system ready or not ready to do. So, but it's an experimental kind of mindset that you can embrace as a leader and frame it as we're not going for the silver bullet, but we're learning something by doing it.
mm. Thank you. The image that came up in my internal eye was a gym
Mhm,
where you're training all these different muscles so that whatever future may appear, you have a higher ability to respond,
mhm,
whatever it is. Um, I was, I didn't watch the Netflix series, I must admit, but I heard my partner watched it and she told me about it, where there were different athletes, very fit people, and they had to do 100 exercises, or there were 100 athletes, and at the end there was only
mhm,
one winner. And there were some who were the army, others were bodybuilders, runners. So they had different muscles they trained over the years. Um,
mhm,
and those who were bodybuilders, for instance, so they had these big muscles, but they couldn't run for very long. So they
mhm.
already lost the game after the first activity, which was running. So if you're too this is a very big kind of loop to arrive at the point. Um, if you're too specialized, if you build muscle
Mhm,
only in one area, and then
mhm.
something else happens, you lose. But how can you build this kind of athletic resilience or adaptability?
This is a great metaphor, Miriam, because actually, this is one of the things we do some um, programs that we teach to an open public, and one that Carolyn offers is called Complexity Fitness,
Mm,
which is basically exactly this notion of going to the gym and increasing and having a varied kind of palette of exercises and habits of mind so that you can be fit for complexity.
yeah.
So it's like, not as a bodybuilder who's trained on a
Mm,
certain way, but a wide ranging kind of fitness for different things that can be thrown at you.
yeah. Um, makes me think, and I don't want to go too deep in it, but I recorded a podcast episode with Marcos Iofisha, Ifo um, he calls himself a future archaeologist,
Mhm. I listened to that episode. It was super interesting.
right? And I found this interesting that instead of doing scenario planning, to just think of a future artifact and then just go prepare for that, the future, the strategy. It's also a way to reduce complexity, but in a very different context, I now realize.
Yeah.
End of bracket. I would be curious. I parked the topic here. The KPIs.
Mhm.
So, what is your take on measuring KPIs in a complex world? What is the sense and nonsense, or better sense?
We're training. So we go to the gym ourselves in cultivating leadership. And one of the things that we're practicing at the gym is how we help our clients work with strategy, because everybody needs to do strategy. But then there are some approaches to strategy that are more suited for a predictable world, which may not be very helpful for an unpredictable world. And so we're learning at the moment some ways in which we can help clients with strategy that is more fit for complexity, which is connected to your point about KPIs, right? Because usually you put KPIs within a longer arc of strategy. We work, for example, with like three horizons, and we try to understand, what is horizon three, what is horizon one immediately here, and what is horizon two. And we try to look for experiments as a proxy for KPIs, but experiments that try to nudge the system in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm.
As an organization, we're 80 people, we are a collective of, it's a very united kind of collective. We have a strong brand identity, but it's a collective of consultants. And we've been set up some 12 years ago with complexity friendly principles. And we decided never to have KPIs in our organization. And that helped us really well. The management theories that we're aware of, we're not sure that we're absolutely right on this, we could be wrong, but it seems to have helped us well. KPIs in an organization like us, which is networked organization, I don't know, other scenarios would be requiring different things, would backfire so easily.
Why is
If
that?
you have a KPI that can easily be gamed by people creating the wrong incentives, the harm that the KPI does would be greater than the benefit that it brings. Meaning, imagine a consultant, like imagine a collective, let's say, I don't know, a studio of associate lawyers, for example, like everybody is an entrepreneur by themselves, they work under the same brand in the same office. If you get some people like a quota, you have to bring in this much money every year. And people cannot meet the quota for whatever reasons. They're going through a divorce, they have a health challenge, or two people are in competition over the same client. The firm suffers from the fact that two people are in competition of the same clients. That's why my phone subscription, like I get 20 calls a day from the same people. Like, do you guys talk to one another? Like, do you guys know that as a client, I'm less happy to receive 10 calls a day? I don't know. I hope that they know better by now. But if some of these incentives and KPIs create unwanted consequences more than the consequences that you want, we always think anytime we try to nudge an experiment or every time we try to encourage people to do something in a certain direction, we always think about what could go wrong with this. How can people game the system, misinterpret the KPI, twist it to their own benefit against the benefit of the collective in a way that actually damages the collective? And we've been going more towards nudging the system, creating preconditions to encourage people to go in a certain direction without making people accountable or of certain goals that can backfire on us. If you put a KPI on performance and you say you have to bring in this much money every year, this is a networked organization. For us, it would not work well. Because it would backfire because, we would lose some of that quality of it's a collective of consultants. People have an incentive, of course, to bring more work in because, their livelihoods depend on it. And we want to do some good work together. So people have already enough internal motivations. They don't need an external KPI. So that's the one thing. So we monitor after the fact. Okay, how did we do financially last year? Okay, we did really well. That's great. Do we need an objective for next year? Actually, no. And so in that case, answering your question about KPI, we know that a KPI would actually do more harm than good to us. KPIs about performance. I don't think we need a KPI about performance because nobody is anyone's boss, strictly speaking. We heard of clients who have these performance kind of mechanisms, which are super sophisticated. Maybe they work really well for them, but they also cause some unintentional harm. And again, I'm not saying, of course, big organizations need that. Let me give you a couple of examples. We're coaching, I've been coaching recently a financial institution. And in finance, in complexity, there is so much randomness and chance in terms of what stocks make it big and what stocks fail, right? It's just a game of chance a lot. And what the conversations that the leaders were having was, how do we reward a good investor? Is a good investor somebody who picks the winning stocks, or is somebody who exerts good judgment in their thinking? And they decided to go with input versus output because you can have a lot of good judgment and still, by pure chance, select somebody who doesn't end up being a winning stock. So they go for input versus output because they acknowledge the role of randomness and luck and bad luck. And so and also they go for long term. Like actually, you will know in 7 years if somebody was a good investor or not. So don't judge them now.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. One, to acknowledge randomness. You can do a great job and still pick a losing stock. You can do a great job and write a great proposal and still not get the RFP through because the client had 20 competitors and you're still doing a great job and you didn't win it just because 20 people were
Mm.
competing. And the other is the time perspective. Like you will probably know in 7 years from now if you were a good CEO of a large conglomerate because it takes time to test if an organization is resilient or not.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
kind of didn't answer your question, really, did it?
Um, Partially. And I think, yes, in the sense that KPIs are complex. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so funny, there's research about the impact of financial incentives on
Mm-hmm.
performance. And since the 60s, they've been running experiments. And none of the experiments has shown that financial incentives work when it comes to creative work. So if you go
Mm-hmm.
beyond the um, factory worker,
Mm-hmm.
where it's really about input output, you know exactly. And even then, um,
Mm-hmm.
they usually backfire because we
Yeah.
become so focused on the financial incentive, and then we are less, by definition, our brains are less creative. Um,
Yeah.
and funny enough, and I don't have any research in mind, but I also wonder whether our minds, as soon as we have a KPI, whether we would exert more creativity in how to trick it in
Mm,
our favor. So how to bypass it or how to manipulate it.
right.
Um, and maybe it is because we want to be creative, so we find our own ways of creativity. I don't know, but I
Yeah.
find this fascinating.
What we've been trying to do is to create enough internal motivation incentives and enough preconditions for people to be excited to do good work. I know it sounds very emergent, but it's actually working well because you encourage people to if you do more work, you get to be with your colleagues more. You get the rewards of, working in a large client team with colleagues that you respect. You have an incentive yourselves in getting more senior so that one day
Yeah,
you take the role of the client lead. So people have enough like internal motivation
yeah.
to be encouraged by themselves without any KPI or any external indicator to do really good work. So I guess the question becomes, so actually, I'll get a bit of a shorter answer now and more to the point. We're really trying our best to create the best um, preconditions in the ecosystem to encourage good things to happen.
Mm,
And so when you encourage that, when you create good conditions in place, trusting that people have enough internal motivation to do the job, like just get out of the way, just let people do what people want
yeah,
to do
yeah.
and get out.
I love that. It's almost the first to create first order conditions. So the to come back to the first order conditions, right? Um,
Precisely. Yeah.
and then you don't need any KPI if
Yeah.
everyone is intrinsically motivated.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I think it would work. Imagine organizations working on this principle that
Mm,
instead of monitoring KPIs, investing that money to ensure that every of their employees is intrinsically motivated to do the best,
mm.
to do a good job.
I think I'm an optimist. I believe that this can happen at the team level. At a huge organization level, if you have 50,000 employees, I don't know how to design for that. There are other people who have a lot better ideas, but I've experienced that at the team level, you can create preconditions for people to do really
Yeah.
good work. And Miriam, I was reflecting on this. Maybe this is kind of our job as facilitators, like create preconditions for people to have the conversation that they need to have, to be motivated to do the work that they need to do, and just get out of the way,
Yeah,
do less.
absolutely. What is it that you would have wished you had known before? Or your advice to your younger self?
maybe just to relax. Well, but there is, okay, so there is a bias. Just relax. There is a bias because 15 years later, I'm doing work that I find fun and I get validation that I think I'm pretty good at this. Like, I'm even tentative in saying I'm good at this because it's hard to take positive feedback, Miriam. So, like, to
You
your
can
point
say it,
about
you
it,
can own it that you're good at it.
I'm good. I'm good at
Great.
what I do. Okay,
Great.
now change topic before I get too uncomfortable. But just to relax in knowing that, you get better at it over time and that you give value to your clients, partners, customers, whatever, by doing the work that you do. And there is another one, which is a bit paradoxical, is that learn more methods so that you can forget about them.
Mm.
By which I mean, if you learn more methods, then you have more flexibility in your tools belt. But at the same time, then I can be relaxed when I go to a client and say, well, do you need this? No, I'm not attached to it. You need this? No, I'm
Mm.
not attached to it. We can just run a dialogue in a circle now. Is that working for you? Okay. But go for simplicity, but after you have a lot of tools in your back pocket.
Yeah.
But you can be flexible because if I only knew 3 tools to facilitate, then I would be kind of a bit
You
tentative.
see
That's
the
like,
nails
oh,
everywhere.
exactly, because you see nails everywhere because you only have 3 hammers. Like, okay, it's this or this or this. And I guess paradoxically, the more tools you know, the more you understand that they're just relative
Mm.
and they're just designed to be fit for purpose. But you can actually pay attention to what is the conversation that you guys now need to have in this room right now to solve the problems you need to solve to get to the results that you need to get to.
Yeah. And isn't it funny that you have to go through this, you have to accumulate all the activities and the methods to then forget about them. So there's
Yeah.
no shortcut there either. It's
It's
almost
like
like,
wisdom cannot be gained, right?
yeah, yeah, and it's almost unconscious, becoming unconsciously competent.
Right. Yes.
That you don't
Yes.
even know where all these ideas come from, because then you're also, it's like cooking without a recipe. You have
Yeah.
experimented so much and you have read so many recipes that you can then, you understand the chemistry behind it.
Yeah. Precisely. So yeah, you can forget about the handbooks
Yeah,
because you've read many handbooks.
yeah.
Yeah. And so back to your question about the advice to younger self, relax, you will get better at it over time and learn more so that you can forget what you learned and design on the spot and actually be present with the group.
Mm.
Be attuned to the group because you're not worried about, oh, shall I run an open space now or should I run a fishbowl conversation, whatever. You can just relax more into it so that you can be even more attuned to the present needs.
Yeah, thank you. What remains your facilitation challenge?
I think the facilitation challenge that I am, some people call it at the edge of my learning about, is between structure and emergence,
Mm.
by which we mean the classic polarity of any facilitator under the sun. I have designed a really nice run sheet and a really, really nice workshop plan. And then in the moment, the group seems to need something else. So do I stick to my design or do I adapt in the moment? Um, and there is never a solution because sometimes you may second guess yourself and say, oh, shall I change now this thing on the go because the group seems to hold a different need? But what if the group is just pushing back a little bit and there is a little bit of resistance, but it would be good to stick to the schedule? Or what if you're holding on too rigidly to the schedule and you're kind of losing the plot and you're missing the pulse of what the group needs at the moment? It's a constant one. It's not super painful, but it's just something that is always in my on
Mm.
my radar, always on my attention.
Yeah,
Does that
yeah,
resonate?
totally, totally. Um,
How do you go
it,
about it today?
so I facilitate very rarely these kind of strategy workshops. where this would be crucial.
Mhm.
Um, so I do more trainings nowadays,
Mhm.
or yeah, more on the
Mhm.
training side of things.
Yeah.
And I agree, there is this, usually when I design a workshop, I put a lot of thought in the process and
Mhm.
with what activity leads to what. And then sometimes the group doesn't see what is about to come. So they
Mhm.
have to suffer through this discomfort before the release comes. Ah, now I understand.
Now I can connect the dots.
And I actually had an experience not so long ago. It was for an open workshop. So I
Mhm.
had prepared kind of a workshop experience for a group of individuals who signed up. Um, and I totally lost them. And it
Oh.
hasn't happened for a very long time. And then I was asking myself exactly the same question. Was there a point that I could have seen it earlier
Mhm.
and let go and just say, huh, it seems as this doesn't work. But then it wasn't, it was maybe too short. Maybe I was expecting them to then have the big aha that didn't come.
They
Um,
will come back at some point. I'm not going to lose them forever. At some point, they will kind of come back and have this magic realization, but they
yeah, and maybe
didn't.
it's, yeah, and maybe it will be only in a week or in a year or never.
Yeah.
And maybe it
Yeah.
was just not for them, which is also okay. Um,
Yeah.
but it was a good reminder that we cannot take it for given. That
Yeah.
even after years
Yeah.
of experience, like, oops, this did
Yeah.
not work out so well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Thank you. And I don't know. You're the host, so you decide, but it would be interesting to have a side podcast calling facilitation nightmares, like all
Mm,
the facilitation fears that people have, because this would be top of the list. Like losing my group would be on top of the list,
yeah,
because we get so scared of it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very true. Is there anything that you would have liked to talk about, but we haven't touched upon?
I was actually just going through my mind to things that I would love to say. I don't know how much time we have to open this, but I've been lucky enough to work with a group of people where we practice what we preach slash teach. And there is so much wisdom that I've learned in being in a community of practice with other people in uncertainty and complexity, where we show up as fully humans and we show up with these balcony moments and we show up with a lot of like, we are invited and encouraged to show up with our not knowing, which doesn't mean, you're not competent, you don't know about this, but on the contrary, we step into our goodness and greatness and our skills. But if we hold ourselves in our places of vulnerability and not knowing, and when we cultivate this social field, like which is very related to what you were saying about psychological safety, um, when we do it ourselves and we create this really strong relational field where we can be strong as a team, really vulnerable, um, open in admitting I was wrong about this, on the balcony of our own thoughts. It's amazing what that creates, not only in my own brain so that I can relax into not knowing, let my guard down, but also at a collective level. If I'm able to say, oh, Miriam, I was wrong about this, because we're wrong in complexity like 20 times a day. So it's just a matter of just admitting, because then we can be more curious in our own learning, which doesn't mean we're always wrong, but it
Mm,
means I can be sitting and not knowing with a curious stance and still be really good at what I do and still be right sometimes a day and wrong 20 times a day. And that's fine. because speaking about KPIs and incentives, I think now the incentives in complexity is more about admitting not knowing and being a learner in the face of conflicting evidence, because people can double down on certainty and can double down on their strong opinions. And I don't know if it's that going to help anyone. And so there is something about the social field. How do we create a social field where people in relationship to one another, in teams, and small teams maybe to begin with, because that seems easier to do, can create enough trust and safety and habits of mind and habits of talking to one another and habits of dialogue where they can show up as vulnerable, curious, aware of their own thoughts, aware of their own preferences and shortcomings, and hold one another in that space. Because I have seen the benefits that that has created in our own team. I'm part of a smaller team within the larger team of 80, and it does magic. It's incredible that just the quality. I'm not saying we're going to be right about any decision that we're going to make in the future, but I witnessed the quality of the conversations that we're having, the quality of the thoughts. And that's the best that you can aim for as a facilitator. And then just trusting that amazing things can happen as a result of that. But, these are the conditions that I would love for people to hold more intentionally as the field in which these good conversations happen.
Yeah. 100%.
Maybe we should do another episode just on that topic.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's totally my vision, or where this entire unprofessionalism topic came from. So how can we help each other to show up a little bit more human?
Nice.
And by being human with each other, we can, nurture this social space of learning and being and achieving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a trust needed that I think people need to trust enough that being in that space is actually more productive than being in the space of fake professionalism where people have all the answers, but the answers are wrong anyhow. So where are you going to go with that,
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Isn't it funny that we often feel more comfortable with an answer, although that we know that it's wrong, than with no answer and just in this wiggly space.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but it's taken me 15 years and I feel a bit more comfortable now compared to years ago. Doesn't mean I'm done with the work, but I feel a bit more comfortable sitting in that uncertainty.
Yes. Took me 42 years.
Still going.
Yes, and still growing. And there might still be a hit and then falling over. And that's the other benefit of having such a group of practice, the safety net around, so that if you fall over, you're not alone and you have those to reassure you that you can stand up again. I had an early mentor. I had a mentor. And he reminded me that the goal is not to avoid falling, but to minimize the time between falling down and standing up again.
That sounds very wise.
Yeah. And he has built many companies and he went bankrupt many times. And every time it goes faster and more successful and learnings. And so, yeah.
I respect that very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Miriam. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I hope that people who are listening take some of that pleasure and fun that I had talking to you today, because it was really a pleasure and very insightful. And I'm glad that we went to places that I didn't know we would go to.
Same here. Very mind-opening and good food for thought.
I'll be happy to provide some links for people to read more if you're happy to.
Yeah. Yes, and we'll put all of that in the show notes. All the links. Thank you.
Thanks.